I got this random curiosity for what projector tech was like in 2025. What is the state of the art for this? So I did what everybody does and I Googled best projector 2025 and this brand came up. And so I reached out to them and asked them to send out a review unit, and they did. Now, over the past few weeks, I've actually been putting this through its paces, not only for home theater and gaming, but also for actual video production use here in the studio. And we'll talk about all of that in a second. There are a lot of really good, really technical, and really useful guides and measurements from other websites, and those websites are much better at that than I can be. But what I can do is provide a pretty good picture of what the user experience might be like going from zero to hero, from no projector to a projector, and actually how it's way more impressive than you might expect. First, a really important disclaimer. Valerion did send this out, but they're not asking me to say anything good or bad about this. They're letting me have my own completely honest take and experience with this. And I think that's important to note. This is a new industry to me, and I'm not sure how common or uncommon paid reviews are in this space, but this was not a paid review. So let's talk about first impressions. So one of the hardest things for me to show you is the sense of scale for this. Just to give you a little bit of a feeling for how big it is, this is our current TV. This is a 75-inch TV. The screen for this projector is 150 inches, which is actually 4 of those 75-inch TVs in a rectangle, which is absolutely crazy. The first time you get this set up and you put on your favorite movie, it is shockingly immersive, not just with size, but with depth because of the size. It's very different than a TV in terms of how the detail and the depth of the image comes across. It's quite a bit different than what I'm used to on an OLED, for example. And it's just, quite frankly, immersive. It really puts you into it because of the physical size. And when you pair it with a good speaker system, it's really top notch. In fact, as a movie guy, I would say outside of IMAX, this is the best theater experience I've ever had, is just sitting in my own comfortable home environment, watching this display with some really great speakers. And quite honestly, I wasn't expecting that. Most of my experience with projectors has been, quite frankly, kind of bad. They always look dull, they look less vibrant, they don't have a lot of contrast, they don't have a lot of brightness. And they really just haven't been all that impressive. But it's been quite a few years since the last time I checked out a projector. And I think that the tech has really gotten to a point of being really, really good with very few compromises. Now, as far as the initial impressions for setup is actually really easy. If you just slap this on a desk or on a stand and do the keystone correction, you can actually get pretty close to what you want for your screen. However, if this is being set up in a permanent fixture, I would highly recommend being very precise with your measurements, where you place this, where your screen is, and you'll need to do some initial testing before you finalize everything. Setting this up correctly will give you the best results for this, and it's worth the setup. Now, my biggest concern was brightness. Is it going to be bright enough to be really comparable to a TV or like a theater-like experience? And if you're in a dark environment, absolutely. These are still going to be best played in a dark environment. And it's not that the projector can't get bright enough for like a daytime lit room. It's that the blacks can't get black enough on a white screen like this. If you're in a bright environment, the contrast on the low end goes up, and that's sort of the problem here. Not necessarily the total brightness, which is around 3000 lumens for the actual projector. Now, if you're using interior lights, it's still a viewable image and it still looks fine enough. But I think a dark environment like any projector is still going to be the best case scenario for this, as close to pitch black as you can get it. Now, in this environment, this is basically quite bright, actually. Like if you're seeing flashing lights on screens, like gunshots or something like that, it kind of feels a bit like getting flashbanged, honestly. It's quite visceral and intense, and those bright, flashy environments can be super bright. And on brighter movies like Avatar, which has like a lot of bright blues, those sorts of movies come across just exceedingly well, where you don't even really want any more brightness than this can really offer. Some movies, for example, a lot of the movies in the horror genre that tend to lean a little dark, in a dark environment, it's definitely not a problem, but the more light you have in that room, the less viewable that movie is going to be. So again, I'd recommend a dark room. Now, details and fidelity are really noticeable when you are stretching a screen to this size. This is a substantial size, and even 4K, I think on the upper limits of what the projector can do, which they listed up to 300 inches for a screen, which is 4 of these bad boys, would be nuts. I think you'd be stretching the limits of what this can do as far as resolution. I think the resolution for 150 to 200 inch screens is probably going to be the sweet spot for image fidelity, where things still seem crystal clear when you have a video that doesn't have any like really bad compression issues, for example. And that kind of brings me up to the type of media that I would recommend using for this. Your best case scenario is probably going to be a 4K Blu-ray player, and I would highly recommend physical media for that for the best possible experience for this, unless you have your own fully uncompressed files that you can use on this. However, the majority of my home theater use in our front room has actually been streaming, and the streaming quality, even though it's compressed compared to like a 4K Blu-ray or an uncompressed file, is surprisingly good. And there's still a large amount of details that can be still isolated and picked out, and it feels like a real 4K image. Now, I've actually heard that this is like effectively like oversampled or something to 4K, and I'm not sure how true that is. That I'll leave that up to some other experts. But the experience of this is not quite as tack sharp as like a 4K OLED is, but it's still very sharp and definitely above what I would consider like a 1080p image to look like. The detailability here is definitely not a worry either. So one of the more fun and cool things that I've been able to do with this is actually watch videos that I've made. I have a small video production company, and videos that we've produced, watching them on a screen like this is just insanely cool. It gives this theater-like experience. It's a lot of fun, and it's kind of trippy to watch your own work on something like this. It's sort of intimidating, but also very cool. But yeah, seeing your own content like this of my son is just otherworldly. It's an experience that I quite frankly am not going to forget anytime soon. It's been extremely cool to have kind of a feeling like this. It's just super unique, and he's just so cute. One of the things we've actually been able to do with this is use this as a background for videos, and for even using it to light up certain subjects, like this weird red topographical map that we've been using for certain product shots. It just looks really amazing, and it's just super interesting, and it's kind of a weird side benefit of something like this. Now, as far as build quality, these are made surprisingly well, actually. Everything from this super high quality aluminum stand to the remote control, the device itself, it's all really well made. It's made in that way where you can tell that it's a newer company that's actually trying really hard, but actually doing better than legacy companies. They're actually putting their best foot forward and not trying to maximize profits, but instead trying to actually make a really good product. It's got that type of feel. The specifications are honestly just as wild, and it's not really any one specification that really intrigued me. It was kind of all of them together and how much this can do. Given the price range. It'll do up to 60 hertz in 4K, but it will also do up to 240 hertz at 1080p with a 4 millisecond response time. So if you want to game on this, you can. And it's actually great. We'll talk about that in a second. This also supports HDR10. It has an output of about 3000 lumens, which is pretty bright. This has 3 different HDMI ports, and one of them is an eARC. This also has USB inputs if you want to play on media from a flash drive. This also supports AirPlay, which is awesome. And actually in the studio here, I actually use that all the time just to show something quickly without having to plug in a cable. And interestingly, this may not be news for people who follow projectors, but for like a beginner like me, I always have heard that projectors have like really bad lifespan, but I was mistaken, because the projectors that have a poor lifespan are actually lamp-based projectors, and this is a laser projector. Lamp projectors have a expected lifespan of about 3,000 to 5,000 hours. Laser projectors have an expected lifespan of between 20 to 30,000 hours, which is nuts. You can watch a 3-hour movie every day for the next 27 years before this is expected to die, which is just... that's incredible, actually. Technology is super sick. Last thing on build quality, just something that I kind of personally like, is on the back they have this magnetized flap where you can just hide your I/O when you're not using this thing. And that kind of feeds into the general design and aesthetic. I think that this thing just looks so good. It doesn't have that kind of cheap plastic outer shell looking thing that makes it kind of not very good for like, just kind of home decor. This has a really modern design, and I think it fits in really well in a lot of different environments. One of the areas that I think these things have advanced the most is in their gaming performance. This can do 4K 60 gaming, of course, but it's at about 15 milliseconds, which is it's a noticeable delay if you're used to kind of faster monitors. But if you want to play a bit faster paced things like Battlefield, you can bump this down to 1080p and do 240 hertz at 4 milliseconds, which is extremely good. It's not good enough for like an actual competition, but it's more than good enough for casual PvP or any single player title, in my opinion. It's very good. Now, of course, cinematic games like Skyrim and Cyberpunk and The Witcher are gonna just look incredible on this. I would bump those single player games up to 4K just to get some higher fidelity, but anything fast paced like Battlefield, I'd stick with the 1080p 240. That was a lot of fun. Actually, one of the craziest games I own is sort of a space flight simulator called Elite Dangerous. If you've never heard of it, it's really sick. It has the entire Milky Way to scale, where you could literally visit billions of planets, billions of stars, and I'm not exaggerating. It's crazy. If you've never looked into it, I highly would recommend it. But one of the things that game does very well is a sense of scale, and it's in like this darkness of space, and so you kind of get to see the ability of the blacks of this projector come through. And this has something called an EBL, which is enhanced black level, I think. And if you really want that game to look dark and deep and immersive and have that depth, EBL is something I would definitely recommend for that. Now, as far as the build quality of the screen, I think it's really good. If you're placing this in a permanent setup, I like this a lot. It's got this aluminum frame that was pretty easy to put together. The screen gets like stretch fit over that frame with these kind of springs. Now, pro tip, I used a Icon or Harbor Freight pick to actually put these on, and that made it way easier. I would highly recommend doing that if you're going to try to put this on. I think if I were to do this again, and if I didn't want the screen up all the time, I might invest in a rolling screen that rolls down and rolls up. Now, when it comes to screens, this one is 150 inches. And I think that's the sweet spot personally. This will technically do up to 300 inches, which is just absolutely wild. That is 4 of those screens like in a rectangle. It's definitely nuts, but this also has to be a lot further back, and therefore it's going to be less bright. Fidelity and brightness for any projector is going to go down the further away you are from your screen. I would say 150 to 200 inches is the sweet spot for this. So this experience has been a wonderful one, and it's been a great learning experience, not only learning more about what projectors in this modern era can do, but also seeing that the compromises are getting less and less. That does not mean without compromise, though. There's a couple things that I think you should note, a couple things that you should pay attention to, and you may have even noticed a few of them in the video and were probably wondering if I was going to bring them up. And I will. Okay, number one is going to be the environment, right? Because that is like the white screen, and like I said, you can't get the blacks to look black on a white screen like that in a well-lit environment. So the contrast on daytime, day-lit environments is going to be really like not that great. That's a big thing. Another thing to consider is that even on the farthest boundaries of where this projector can extend to, there is still a little bit of a border that is like considered light leak. And this is very normal to projectors. It's not specific to this one. It's not even necessarily a bad thing. But one recommendation I have to avoid this is to either use the screen on a dark wall behind it or use something like curtains to kind of hide that border if you can. But there might be a border depending on your setup. And depending on the angle that this is coming in at, you can actually have a really odd looking border that doesn't look like a square if this isn't perfectly set up in like a straight line. One of the biggest advantages to modern projectors is that you can do like a keystone correction where you can have this shooting at a wall sideways and flatten the image to make it look correct from straight on. But because of the light leak, you'll have some weird shapes from time to time depending on your setup, if that's relevant to you. The last downside here is that if you are close enough, you can see a little bit of screen dooring. And while this disappears about 5 to 6 feet away from the actual screen, if you are close, you will notice. Also, text is sort of hard to read on this, partially because of screen dooring and also partially because of some chromatic aberration. But from my actual experience, in most scenarios, this is not noticeable. So this begs the question of what have I learned? Is this really, really great? Is it just okay? Is it good? Is it bad? There's a couple key things that I have absolutely learned about this experience. A lot of people are going to compare this to a TV, and I think that's really the wrong way to look at this. This is something that you would have to really set yourself up to experience things, to go through an intense and visceral and kind of an experience that has some depth to it, and really put yourself in an environment that makes you feel a certain way. Kind of like how movie theaters do. You're just kind of translating that feeling just to your home. To be completely honest, in my personal opinion, sound is as important here as the screen. If you're just using this with crappy speakers, you're not going to really have a fun theater-like experience. I would spend a lot on speakers as well to get something that sounds really, really immersive. But when you put this on, it's like an event. Honestly, this experience is better than I expected it to be. I was kind of coming into this a little bit critical, thinking that it wouldn't be all that great, but the size and the scale is like, you never really get used to it. Every time you watch a movie, it's just, you have that feeling of like, oh, this is big, it's powerful, and that's cool. So my advice to somebody coming into this, would I recommend this? Absolutely. Definitely set aside the correct space for it. And once you have that, I think that this is great. I've seen some objective third-party measurements of this as well, not just the stuff that Valerion has, and it actually performs very well. I wouldn't take my word for that. Do your own research and all that stuff. But yeah, as far as a first time coming into this kind of TV to projector transition, this has been a remarkable experience, and it's been a lot of fun. I want to thank Valerion for sending this out. I want to thank you for watching. Bye.